Welcome to the 9th Koi Coaching Podcast. Our intention is to help you discover your true self, move to the next chapter of your life with confidence and self-worth. Discover the benefits of authentic living with your host, Caroline Jones.
Hi everyone, I'm Caroline from 9th Koi Coaching and welcome to the first podcast in the Authentic Self series. Today we're here to explore the concepts of courage and vulnerability, how they're linked and why they're important in discovering your authentic self. We're going to have a chat with special guest, Kat Sorbello, and hear how having courage and showing authenticity has changed her life. Firstly, let's find out exactly what courage and vulnerability is. You may have heard the famous line, "Feel the fear and do it anyway." Or, as Nelson Mandela once said, courage is not the absence of fear, but triumph over it. Courage is basically overcoming your fear to take action and achieving something that you want. Vulnerability is consciously choosing not to hide your emotions or desires from others. This was said by Mark Manson in his book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which is a great read. It's opening up to new experiences, people, and uncertain situations. Vulnerability is sharing our feelings with those who are important to us. Courage and vulnerability are intrinsically linked because they both require a degree of emotional exposure. They require us to put ourselves out there for emotional risk. Both concepts are important in discovering our authenticity because the more we understand ourselves and express our thoughts and opinions, the closer we become to showing the world our real selves. So what I'd like to do now is move over to having a bit of a conversation with Kat. Kat has had an interesting decade, I would say. She's going to tell us a little bit about what she's been doing and how courage and vulnerability has helped her in her life journey. So hi again, Kat.
Hi, Caroline.
So Kat, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are right now and how you got there.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this podcast. The courage and vulnerability and the way that you've explained it is extremely interesting. And I can see that through the past decade of how the two have played a very important part in my life. Right now, I am living in Chile, which 10 years ago, I would not have even thought of. And I got here in 2019, but I started my journey in 2018 when I found myself in a situation where I had recently left a relationship. I had no dependencies. My house that I was renting was due to be up for renewal in a couple of months, and I was in a job that was fulfilling but didn't have to keep me in Australia. So I found myself in a situation that I could cut all of these ties and set off on a journey of traveling by myself that I started to do in 2010, but didn't have the courage then to do it by myself. So I thought I had this opportunity that was handed to me on this silver platter, and I decided to take it. And I loved it so much. I loved being on this journey by myself, and I made the decision that I wasn't quite ready to go back home because at this stage I didn't know who I was or where my place was back at home after being away for so long. And I now had new goals. And one of those was to continue to practice my Spanish. So now I'm living in the middle of a wine region, in the middle of the countryside in Chile with my new partner in the middle of a pandemic, living with a Chilean family.
Wow, that is a very big leap from a little townhouse in Red Hill in Brisbane.
It sure is.
So obviously there's a lot of decisions that you had to make along the way to your spot now in Chile, to do with, travel, where you wanted to live, who you wanted to live with, and being by yourself, I guess, put you in a fairly vulnerable spot as well. What do you think the biggest challenge you've had in showing courage is?
The biggest challenges for me, if we go back to where I was in a situation where I had the courage to end things in my life that I wasn't happy with. The hardest thing for me and the biggest challenges I had was all of the what ifs. What if I end this long-term relationship and as a result, I lose all of these amazing friends I've made over the past 10 years? What if I go overseas by myself and I don't enjoy it? And all of those what ifs, the result that I was seeing were failures. I always saw it as saying, if this happens, it's a failure. If I lose all of these friends and I failed all of those relationships as well, and all of those friendships. And if I go overseas and I don't last the initial 6 months, I've said, I then failed myself and I failed my family and I failed everyone around me because I told them what I would do and I didn't achieve that.
Wow.
So the biggest challenge that I had was all of the what ifs that would come into my head.
And did any of those what ifs come true?
No, none of them. None of them came true. And I think maybe because I was pondering about them, I had the opportunity to speak to people about them, especially about losing the friends. I was very honest with one of the close friends that was helping me through one of those situations. And she made me realize that my relationship with a particular person doesn't define my relationships with other people. And just because a lot of us had a large group on social media where we would communicate, leaving that social media group didn't define my relationships with those people in those groups. So understanding that and being aware that that didn't define the relationships I had made it easier to get through it. But it's still having those what ifs in your head were very challenging. But none of them came true, like you said.
Oh, that's great. It sounds like there was a lot of moments where you sort of had to take a big breath and do what you wanted despite the fear.
Absolutely. The pushing myself to achieve things, especially when you're by yourself, like what you said before, being by myself, traveling by myself and making all the decisions by myself, it is so freeing. And at the same time, it's scary. At the same time, you can get so stuck in your mind and as a result, not do anything.
Yeah. And what do you think the most surprising thing you've found about being vulnerable is?
Good question. If we take it back to traveling, and I've been pondering this a lot lately, my traveling, as I said before, started in 2010. So I started traveling to London, and then over the past 11 years now, I've been to 52 countries, and this is the 5th country that I've lived in. So over that time, what has surprised me most about being put in vulnerable positions and pushing myself to try new things, pushing myself to have the courage to do things, the most surprising skill that I've learnt, or the most surprising thing that's happened, is a transferable skill of having this amazing problem-solving skill. So when I'm on the side of the street and the bus hasn't come, and because the bus hasn't come, I'm not able to catch my plane, for example, that puts me in quite a stressful situation. But every time little things like this happened, I was the only person that could solve it. And there was no way I was going to be sleeping on the side of the street, nor was there a way I was going to be going to bed hungry. So you kind of started to say to myself, well, I have to solve it because no one else will. And I have to solve it because there's no way I'm going to end up on the side of the road. So having that kind of mentality and practicing that a lot has now allowed me to build this skill up of problem solving where I can solve problems pretty quickly. And that has then moved over to different facets of my life, whether that's been working on relationships with friends who come to me because of my problem solving skills when they have an issue, or being it that I'm working with clients now and helping them with their problem solvings or their problems that they're having. And even with everyday life, I think the biggest and surprising thing that I've found is how quickly I can now solve a problem.
I do remember, it was a little while ago now, getting a text message from you. And I think it was the middle of the night over there, and you were like, oh crap, I'm on the wrong bus. And I vaguely recall you having to have a chat with the bus driver to let you off so that you were I can't remember if you were going to the airport or where you were going, but at the time, even for me sitting here in Australia going, whoa, that's really scary.
Yeah, I remember that. And if you don't mind me saying, I would love to share that story to just explain how I would not have been able to do that such a long time ago. But
yeah, absolutely.
what it was I had booked a bus to go from Honduras to the airport at Guatemala. Just before we crossed the border, they told me that they're not going to drive me all the way to the Guatemalan airport, and they'll put me on another bus instead. So at midnight, at a border in Guatemala and Honduras, they got me on a different bus that I hadn't booked. I didn't know about the company. And before then, the bus driver of my previous bus had booked me a room for him and myself to rest in while we waited for the next bus. So thinking about 10 years ago, if that was my first trip that I ever had, I wouldn't have been able to get through it. And now with the problem solving skills that I did have, and my very limited Spanish at that time as well, I was able to get through that situation. I was a lot more, I guess, street smart, that you would say, in being in Central America at the time as well. And I do remember, it's making my heart race remembering that time. But I made it, obviously. I made it to the airport. I made it on my flight. But what would I have done if that was my first time?
Yeah, that's pretty scary. But I'm glad, I'm glad you're good. I'm glad you survived that one.
Okay.
So how do you think these experiences have led you to understand your true nature?
I think when I started my journey of traveling, it opened up my eyes a lot more to different cultures, different ways of living. It helped me become more adaptable. It helped me to become more accepting. And with that, being on the road, and not that I was on the road all the time, but being on a hike in the middle of nowhere, you're with your own thoughts. And constantly putting myself in those positions has helped me to really work on a lot of things that I would just push to the side. So especially since 2018, when I was on this journey and traveling just by myself, I've really spent a lot of time on working on who I am, what I like, what I don't like. I've also been working on understanding what my boundaries are and making sure that I can clearly verbalize them as well. And now that I feel I'm on the other side of what was kind of a, let's say, a hectic decade where I feel I'm back to myself, or I shouldn't really say myself because I'm no longer a teenager, but being happy with who I am, having those boundaries to tell someone that they're not treating me right, has all led me to accept who I am, be happy with who I am. And for that, I have now found myself in a relationship where the person treats me like the way that I should be treated, because I now have the courage to be able to express my feelings and put myself in that vulnerable position without thinking that the other person's going to disregard my thoughts or that the other person is going to invalidate my feelings and thoughts.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you're happy. It's been quite a journey for you to get there, obviously physically, but mentally as well.
It sure has.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Kat. Really enjoy your stories. They're always, they make my heart race as well. So if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about Kat, she actually has her own business. Kat, I'll leave it to you to explain a little bit more.
Sure, thank you. So now I help people be able to design their own courses online. And we don't really speak about that, but that is my career that I have worked in, learning and development. And so helping people to design courses online, with my experience, I can support the subject matter expert. But if you wanted to know more about any of my travel journeys or my business, you can find me on Facebook, Kat Sabello, and you can also find my website, www.thestellarway.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Kat.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me on the podcast today.
Yay! All right, guys, thank you for sticking with us. I really hope that, you found that talking with Kat and me explaining some things about courage and vulnerability has sort of helped you, or maybe inspired a little bit of interest in you to delve a bit deeper in yourself. So what we heard about today is, what courage and vulnerability is, how they're linked together, and why they're important in discovering who you really are. If you aren't part of the Courage and Vulnerability course that I've designed yet, you can check me out on Facebook or on my website, www.ninthkoi.com. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Okay, you good, Kat?
Yeah.
Yay!